Welcome to Women in Resistance, a powerful podcast where we honor the courage, resilience, and revolutionary spirits of women across the globe. Hosted by Fubara Eneli Esq and Adesoji Iginla, we uncover untold stories of defiance against systemic oppression, whether colonialism, racism, sexism, or economic injustice. From historic icons like Winnie Mandela and Fannie Lou Hamer to today's trailblazers, we shine a light upon those shaping a more just world. This is a call to honor the past, embrace the present, and build an empowered future. Yes, greetings, and welcome to Women in Resistance podcast. And I am your host, Adesoji Iginla. With me is co-host and the spirit behind the entire thing, my sister from another mother, Fubara Eneli Esq. How are you, sister? Yes. And today we journey through the life and legacy of Abelinken. And without further ado, we do have Abelinken in the house. And let's not take too much time and get her to give us a snippet of who she really is. And then if we do have questions, we throw that matter. Yes. Good evening.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. And thank you for joining us. You go by many names, but I would allow you to do us the honor. What should we call you?
Well, of course, my stage name is Abbey Lincoln. My African name is Aminata Moseka, and that was a name that was given to me when I traveled to Guinea and Zaire with my dear friend and sister, Miriam Makeba. I understand that you've had an opportunity to speak with her as well.
Yes, that's the case.
And this was in the 70s, right after I left my marriage to Max Roach. And I'll tell you more about that, or you can ask me more about that later. But in Guinea, I was introduced to the head of state, Sekou Touré. Miriam Makeba at that time was working for the government, and I was given the name Aminata. And Aminata, as I understand it, most of us pray, at least from the Christian faith, and we say Amen. And if you study Egyptian cosmology, you know that there was what we call a pharaoh now, a ruler known as Tutankhamun. And that is really where that name comes from. And Aminata is the female version. And it's really an embodiment of God.
Okay.
And then when I was in Zaire, the Minister of Information who spoke French, in terms of the European languages he spoke, he named me Moseka. And he had to, share this through Miriam. He told me that Moseka was a god of love in the form of a maiden. He didn't tell me it was a goddess. And I knew then that I had come home because I know that God is a God, male and female. I do not worship any man. I do not worship man as God alone. I'm the one. It's me and God. We women, we are gods as well. We are the ones who make the baby. Women need to be ashamed of themselves for buying into this notion of God being male, and then that they who actually bring forth life, we clone the baby. The babies are made within us. Then you birth the baby, and then you turn around and bow down to a man and worship him as God, but deny the God within you? That's crazy. In fact, there's a poem, I was going to save it for later, but seeing as we're here, I am many things. I'm a singer, I'm an actress, I'm a composer, I'm a poet, I'm a painter, I'm an artist in every form of artistry. And I wrote a poem called Where Are the African Gods? May I share it with you?
Please do, please do.
Where are the African gods? Will we know them when they suddenly appear? The ones dismissed with voodoo, rock and roll, and all that jazz and jungle mumbo jumbo and razzmatazz? Where are the African gods? The ones who live within the skin, without skin, and in the skin again. Do they hide among the shadows while we stumble along the way? Or did they go with heaven to prepare another day? Where are the African gods? Who will save us from this misery and shame? Where are the African gods? Will we find them when we pray in Jesus' name? Where are the African gods who live and set us free? We are the African gods. We are. You and me.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
coming back to my names, you may call me Aminata Moseka because that really encapsulates who I see myself as and how I have chosen to live in the world. The Bible says, believe it's the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. You are God. So how is it that you are worshiping somebody else's God made in their image? That is the root of all of our problems as African people. We are the only people who abandon ourselves, our gods, to chase after and seek what? Salvation from somebody else's God. How can you then be free? But of course I had other names. I was the 10th of 12 children. And I was born Anna Marie Wooldridge on August 6th, 1930 in Chicago, Illinois. But I was raised in rural Calvin Center in Cass County, Michigan. My father built the house we lived in with his own hands. When I was about 5 years old, we had a piano in the house, and I would just go and I knew a song, Way in a Manger. And I would go and I taught myself how to play the song. I taught myself the pauses between the notes, and nobody stopped me. I suppose it didn't bother my mother or my father, and if it had bothered them, one of my older siblings would have stopped me. But nobody stopped me. There were 2 churches in our town, the town that we lived in at that time, and we went to the African Methodist Church. There was no way my father, with as hard as he worked, was going to have us bring some white man and hang up on our wall and say that's the God we were worshiping. And I would sing in church and I would sing at school. May have been around 10 years old. Parents had been married, I think, for almost about 30 years when they moved. And my mother initially moved with my father. All of us moved. But she couldn't take it anymore. And she asked for a divorce. Went to court and got her divorce. But in that divorce, she did not ask for my father to pay a penny.
Why?
She knew that man. I think if she had, and if he had been forced by the government to pay anything, that man was liable to show up at the doorstep and unleash his anger on somebody. And we moved back from the city to where we lived previously in rural Calvin Center. And we about starved to death that winter. There was this like a hippie family or something like that. And they brought us 20 rabbits. And that's how we ate and survived that winter. Because my father, he provided for the family. He worked, he provided for the family. And when we moved back, everything was on my mother's shoulders. She had to figure it all out in the wintertime. And the other Black families in the town, they were upset with my mother. That was not a common thing to get divorced at that time.
Okay.
They wouldn't help us.
Okay.
And
So we're
eventually,
ostracized.
my mother moved us to Kalamazoo, and we did get some government assistance. And I continued to sing at the high school there. Mr. Shannery was our band director. But I knew I wasn't going to college. that was just not for me. And shortly after I graduated from high school, my older brother who lived in California came to visit to check on my mother, and he took me back with him to California. And that's where I started singing in some of the nightclubs. And then came the names. At one point, I was called Gabby Lee. At one point, it was Anna Marie Woolridge. And then at one point, it was Gabby Anna Marie. It was just, they wanted me to have this French sounding names. And I said, Anna Marie is as French as it gets. Of course, Woolridge is as English as it gets. Woodbridge, Woolridge. But eventually, I met a man who became my manager, and Russell. And in conversation with him, we came up with the name, really, he came up with the name Abbey Lincoln. Abbey from Westminster Abbey.
Okay. Cool.
And Lincoln, because he was a man who was very socially aware. And he said, well, since Lincoln didn't free the slaves, maybe you can, Abbey. And so that is where I got the name Lincoln from. And I became Abbey Lincoln. That became my stage name.
Okay. Interesting.
And back then, I was singing mostly covers of other people's music. I released my first album, and the cover of that album, oh my goodness, it was so provocative. Cleavage and everything out, tight dresses, all of that. That was the image that I thought I needed to have to be successful. But for all my adult life, I've been known as a beautiful woman, and I'm certainly grateful for that. Although I'm acutely aware that beauty is within and not so much what you look like on the outside. But growing up, I remember being 14 years old and just wondering if I would ever be beautiful like my older sisters were. And my mother knew that I had these thoughts because she saw the kids make fun of me and make fun of my features. And she said, don't worry, you're going to be beautiful like your sister Betty in a few more years. And it really just cooled me out. So I've been known as a beautiful woman all my life on the stage. But because of that physical beauty, people discounted my talent because if you look a certain way, you're not supposed to be talented. You're not supposed to, I guess, have brain cells. You're supposed to be really stupid.
Oh.
And some of that reaction from the world really has inspired my writing and the expansiveness of how I've lived. I had to write because it's the thing that kept me sane and secure. Or I might have just gone mad with just the messages that you get from the world. So I sang in California, and then I had an opportunity to go to Honolulu to sing.
Okay.
And it was there that I met Billie Holiday. I understand you have also spoken with her.
Yes, we have. Yes.
And I was, I think, about 23 years old at the time, and she would come to the clubs where I sang and just watch me. Billie Holiday was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Physically striking. She was a queen without her queendom, without her court.
Yeah.
And contrary to the lies that are being told about her, Billie Holiday was the consummate professional. She did not come onto the stage with a cigarette or with alcohol. When she got on that stage, she was consummate storyteller. She never tried to be anything that she wasn't. She sang and she spoke her passion into the words. It was a conversation when Billie sang. She would sometimes talk you through the message. She was the queen of her generation, and I would say of our times. Billie was the only one of all the women back then of the jazz era who were considered queens who had the courage to sing Strange Fruit. And of course, we know it cost her dearly. And yes, she had, what we would call our demons, but that was her way of numbing the pain because she suffered a lot of abuse, which I'm sure you covered.
Yeah, we
when
did.
you talked about her. But Billie Holiday and I became friends, and she would give me advice. And I remember, but I'll tell you about my pedigree. I consider myself royalty. You know, of all my mother's 12 children, my parents had dignity. They raised us to have dignity. They only had to say something once. We were obedient children. And I never really had very close friends in what they call jazz. You know, that's not what we called our music. That's the name they gave it. And, you know, initially, jazz was seen as, you know, that music played in brothels and things like that, you know, music for the low lives. But I never really had too many close friends within the jazz world because there was a lifestyle that accompanied it. And I was not going to be for the streets. So, you know, one of my brothers ended up being a judge. One of my brothers was a VP for a major corporation. We were serious-minded people. We weren't, you know, none of us went to jail. None of us did drugs. None of us got into that lifestyle. That's how we were raised. And I always had that sense about myself, of who I am, regardless of the music that I make and what might surround it. Well, I ended up moving to New York and I met Max Roach. I also met Thelonious Monk. I met Duke Ellington when I was in Honolulu. I met some of the greats, Louis Armstrong. These were masters of their art.
Correct.
And I had an opportunity to really learn from Max and to really understand the music as an artist. And, you know, I'd acted in a number of films. And in my first film, I wore a dress that Marilyn Monroe had worn. I was actually photographed in that red dress on the cover of Ebony magazine.
You are listening to Women and Resistance with Fubara Eneli Esq and Adesoji Iginla, where we honor the voices of women who have shaped history through courage and defiance. If you're finding these stories inspiring, take a moment to subscribe, share, and support this platform. Together, we amplify the voices that deserve to be heard. Now, back to the conversation.
And I was really proud of that dress, and I wore it, you know, to different events. And one time Max Roach said, you know, you don't have to dress like that. You know, like I didn't have to sell my art with my body. And that made sense to me. And I said, you know, I know who I am, and I don't have to wear hand-me-downs either. And so I took that dress and I threw it in the incinerator. I was done with that dress. And one day, you know, we were at a club and there were all these, you know, jazz artists and other folk. And I just noticed how the black men just couldn't keep their eyes off the white women. And I said, what is this? What is this about? And one of the responses I got was, well, you know what it's about. You all straighten your hair to look like them. And that was it for me. I said, I can wear my hair like God gave it to me. My hair. Started wearing my afro. Some people argue about who was the first to do it. I don't get into all of those kind of things because it's actually unimportant. You know, I'm talking to you, and yes, I've given a lot of interviews. I never did finish my autobiography, although my archives at Rutgers University, and I believe there's a book coming out on me next year.
Yeah. That's the
But
case.
I'm not really interested in everyone knowing everything about my life.
Why so?
I didn't come to the stage to be popular and to be known. Came to save me from the grief of living here. And there's a lot of grief here. There's a lot of pain in this world. So I sing songs about my life that help me to live. I don't have to go to a therapist. I can write it down and remember where I've been. I can heal from within. But my songs are a way for me to process and to cope with this life. And so I gravitate to songs that help me live, because if you sing, you pay attention to this. I really want your listeners, your viewers to hear this, because, you know, the most common theme in music, in whatever genre, is love and sex, if you will. And I can't speak for you men. I guess I could. There are a lot of sad love songs. I remember, singing some Billie Holiday songs, and it cost me a lot. And she's singing about her man. 2 or 3 girls has he that he likes as well as me. He beats me too. What can I do? You can leave. And I used to sing those songs, but you have to understand this. If you sing something over and over, if you say something over and over, and if you set it to music, it really is a prayer. It goes up into the atmosphere
And becomes
and it'll bring you the return of what you've been saying. So I couldn't, once I had that understanding, keep singing heartbreak and sickness and illness and doom and gloom into my life. Words have power, and you set it to music. And that prayer, that energy brings back fruit. The reason the African American people have music is because our ancestors practiced it. Music and dance. Woo! We brought that here. We inherited it like we inherited our hair and our skin color. It's in us, the ability to express yourself. And by golly, I was going to set my hair free. And I did. I actually even organized a hair extravaganza. It was a whole fashion show showcasing us with our natural hair. And wouldn't you know that the hairdressers, the beauticians were mad at me. They said I was going to cost them their businesses because their business was to straighten our hair. And here you are saying you don't have to do that. But yes, and even in my wedding photos with Max, I had my afro, I had my natural hair. Now, speaking of my relationship with Max Roach was a master musician. And, I started working with him. We were married from 1962 to 1970, but I started working with him before then. And we were in an intimate relationship, and he was married. And I didn't care anything about his marriage or his wife. See, I'm a polygamous woman.
Okay.
And the way it used to be, his wife actually would have been helping him to get together the resources to pay my bride price in Africa.
Yeah, okay. You are talking about this.
Wives and you help your husband, yes. We don't have to be at loggerheads. And I actually helped to raise his daughter, Maxine. Maxine ended up performing on quite a few of my albums. But let me tell you this thing about marriage. You know what? I'll come back to that. Let me get back to the music. I believe that songs, some people ask me, do songs have the power to change, or do they at least help? And my response is, I don't do music for that reason. I certainly don't do it for the money. Listen, at the time that I walked away from my marriage to Max Roach, I also walked away from my career. We were the power couple. There was a documentary on Max and Abbey. We had a commercial, Max and Abbey. We were selling products and things. And when I said I'd had enough, I left the marriage and I left my career and I left town. And I lived above these garages in just 3 rooms. And I started writing and painting and reading. And then I took my trip to Africa with my friend Miriam. But I do music for my own spirit. I believe that God made us and God made the world, and God has to fix this world. And God might yet use us as gods to fix the world. I'm not trying to change anything. It's the Creator's world. And if all of this chaos is all right with God, I'm going to find my peace some kind of way. I get sad. I don't know where we're going through. I don't know why we're going through all of this. I don't know what we did as African people before this time that has visited this type of misery and shame on us. Sometimes I cry. I have to let it out. All we have to depend on is love. You have some regard for yourself and the people that you know. And we all deserve some love. The arts are the expression of the great human Holy Spirit, that is love. Through the arts, through technology, through the sciences. They talk about Egypt all the time. As a matter of fact, for those of you in the United States, get your paper money out. It's Egypt. It's the pyramids on your money. They talk about Egypt all the time without talking about Egypt. It's because, but why do we talk about Egypt? Because the artists did the work. When you go now and you see the Meta Nature, you still see those drawings. The artists did the work. The artists created that house that's on that money. By the way, a pet peeve of mine, the lies they tell us. Let me see if you can finish this sentence. Money doesn't grow
on trees.
I get so mad when I hear that. How do you look me in the face and tell me such a bold-faced lie? Print it on.
Paper, trees.
Without art, we would not be human. All human beings practice art. All of them. Now, some human beings like to copy the art of others, but all human beings practice art. They have music. They dance. They create and make things. Women create the people. Men build the bridges. Here's another thing that gets on my nerves. There's a book, this one, Soundtrack to a Movement. And they have a couple of pages in here about me. And I read something they said in here, just had me about to climb a wall. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, I might not be able to find it immediately, but they had the nerve to say something about, I'm a feminist. Did I ever tell you that I'm a feminist? As a matter of fact, that whole notion of feminism makes no sense to me. Think that because of how men have operated in our more recent history, women have had these resentments. And white women in particular, but now increasingly even black women, haven't been woman enough to speak about it until just now. And so they want to talk about feminism and the exclusion of men. How is that possible? We work together.
Yeah.
We need the female and we need the male. There were times I got invited to, will you do an all women's this and all of that? And there are formations that I've been a part of in terms of activism. But I said, no, we must come together. So don't listen to anyone who would try to rewrite my story now and say, she's a feminist. That's not what I'm about. And as for women, I'll say this, your body, your decision. Yes. Keep your dress down. Did we start feeling the need in a sexualized world, and I understand this because I told you how I started, to feel that you could only dance and sing if you were naked or half naked? Now, understand that we're in different times, but in the times that we're in now, why is that what we feel like we have to do? And let me also say this. I am opposed to abortion. You can't kill the babies and justify it. You have to attack the reasons people feel that they can't have their babies and can't raise their babies. That's the issue you attack. But you can't just kill the babies. So much that I want to say. I am an actress and I am a woman. More than anything, I am female. And I'm very proud to be female. Female of our species. Yeah. And I revel in being a woman. Now, going back to my marriage with Max, stay with me. Hopefully you were following the story.
Yep.
We recorded quite a few albums together. February 61, I, along with Rosa Guy, Maya Angelou, and some other women, we had formed a group called the Cultural Association of Women of African Heritage. And we organized a demonstration at the United Nations. We protested the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. If you have not had a chance to listen to the seminal work Freedom Suite now that I did with Max Roach, what we did, and we could have started earlier, but we started with slavery And we went through the emancipation, the civil rights movement. We brought it up to the African independence movement.
Right.
Because all of these things are connected. Of course, we could have taken it all the way back to Egypt as well. Some people thought it was really radical. But there were about 60 of us, women and men. We stormed the United Nations Security Council because someone had to speak up for what they did to our brother Patrice Lumumba. And if you don't know that story, but I believe you do, because I believe you also had a conversation with
Andre
Blue Wing. You see the connectivity.
Yeah.
We burst into that council chamber shouting, "Murderers! Assassins!"
You killed him.
And many credit that action with the opening salvo of what was now called the Black Power movement. A little different, but a continuation of the civil rights movement, which was sparked by the lynching of Emmett Till.
Yeah.
That album is one that you all need to listen to if you haven't. And there was a particular song on it where all I had to do was scream. But that wasn't my usual way of life. I'd had really no reason to go through life screaming. If I did, that was not how I chose to respond to my challenges. And Max came up to me and he said, as an actress, I live my music, my lyrics. I believe that people should understand your words, and I bring all of that ability to act to the stage with me, even when I sing. And when I started to write my own songs and eventually to compose, it allowed me to embody the fullness of who I am on the stage. I could bring everything, all my abilities as an artist. And you know how I came to start composing?
Please tell.
I released an album and I'd worked with Thelonious Monk, and Max had reached out to different people to, write reviews, some words about the album and the liners. He'd reached out to Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis. Have you all talked to Ruby Dee yet?
Not yet.
Oh my goodness. Magnificent woman. And Thelonious Monk wrote that I wasn't just a singer, I was a composer. And when I read that and read it again, I believed, and I started composing my own music as well. And so Max and I continue to make music together. We're now husband and wife. We spoke at universities and the like. But I must say, I don't want to live in a house with a man. I want him to live in his own house and come see me sometime when he's in a good mood. I used to talk to these journalists. Sometimes it's these white men covering the jazz scene, as they called it. And I would regale them with the joys of polygamy. And you could just see the look of confusion on their faces. But I meant every word I said. I think that it's hard for a man and a woman to be together when they're under the gun in society. That's what my song Nothing But a Man is. That's what Nothing But a Man, that's what that song is about. See, a man wants to show everybody he's the biggest and the baddest. That's just kind of how you guys are wired. If he can't be that in greater society, then he comes home and he wants to be the king of the hill. And sometimes that is expensive to a woman. Him feeling beat down out there requires him to come and only feel big and bad at the expense of a woman who he has to then make smaller. Especially if she's got a mind of her own and if she's got something going for herself. Even though I had this famous romanticized marriage, I thought, Lord, I can't do this. Because it's a lie. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I'm thinking about Tina Turner singing, "What's Love Got to Do with It?" I loved Max. Max is a great man. And he was a fantastic father. Just couldn't handle that anymore. And so I left. I left my career as well. I went to California in 1971, and I lived with my mother in a $70 a month Los Angeles apartment to cleanse my spirit. And I suppose to expiate my guilt, I hated the rigors of acting. My ornery ways were not welcome in Hollywood. I was actually offered an opportunity to appear in the movie The Owl and the Pussycat. So I did the movie with Sidney Poitier, For the Love of Ivy. How many of you have watched For the Love of Ivy? It's still readily available. That was a fun movie to make. And, at this point, it's like I was at the height of my career and, I was supposed to now make more movies, but I was not about to grovel and beg and be these things. They're always wanting to cast Black women as maids.
Typecast.
And in the Love of Ivy, I was a maid. But
one with a mind of
the movie, the film centered around me. And the white family I served they were actually the supporting cast, if you will. Black women slaving for Black families. White women who hadn't cut an onion in 10 years. Didn't know the first thing about their children or their husband if that maid wasn't there. But that movie focused on who I was as a human being who had decided I didn't want to be a maid anymore. And these white people who proclaimed to love me could not imagine that I could aspire to a life beyond serving them. Surely I had to be happy. Surely that had to have been my wildest dreams because I lived in a nice home and they even had a pool. What else could I be looking for? Anyway, so the producer for this movie, The Owl and the Pussycat, called me on the phone, and I ended up, quote unquote, losing the part because the producer felt I was rude to him. When I left New York and headed to Los Angeles, I was haunted by the contradictions of my history with Max, a subservient wife at home who screamed for freedom on the stage.
So you're saying the two cannot be balanced?
Couldn't balance it. There may be many who do. Maybe they balance it with drugs and alcohol as well. But the two didn't add up to me. I couldn't be one thing out here and needing to be something else in my home because that's what my man demanded of me for him to feel like the biggest and the baddest.
King of the hill.
After I moved to Los Angeles, I supported myself for about a decade with just occasional acting jobs, nightclub appearances. I did some different TV appearances. I was on Mission Impossible, All in the Family, shows like that. But I had different nightclub appearances, but I also spent a year as a Pan-African lecturer at what is now called Cal State Northridge. But I was also reading and writing the whole time. Of course, that was during the period where I also traveled to Africa and really got more in touch with my roots, who I am as an African woman. When I think about it, I think I've been hiding over the years and a little apprehensive of stardom. When I look back over my multiple identities and my what people would consider abrupt career detours, I suppose I would as well, it scares me. Stardom scares me. It still does. Because it has a way of sucking you in if you're not careful. Of taking over who you are. And you lose the spirit of the art because you're always chasing that next
fix,
next hit, that applause. And I liked my time away from that pressure because I like practicing the arts and I like having time to practice them. And to do that, you have to have solitude. So I had some sporadic recordings for Japanese and European labels from 1973 to 1985. And I got a call from Jean-Philippe Allard, and that began a whole renaissance, if you will, of my career when I began recording with Verve. And I'm actually, I think, going to share a song for one of the albums from those years. The result from that first call in 9 was The World is Falling Down, my critically acclaimed album that came out in 1990. 1990 also featured Jackie McLean on saxophone, Clark Terry was on trumpet, and then I released You Gotta Pay the Band in late 1991. And that really catapulted me back into the spotlight, if you will. It also featured some of the last recordings of tenor sax player Stan Getz. And most of that work was written and arranged by me. And so it really showcased my talents, not just as a writer and a singer, but also as a composer. Yeah, you would just have to go, and there's so much that I could cover with you. I redid the first song that I wrote, I believe, which is People in Me, which was originally published in 1973. And then I did The Legend of Evelina Kofi, which is loosely based on my mother as a cosmic visitor. And some would say this kind of alluded to my metaphysical beliefs. And I think that my writing is evolving and moving more towards an expression of spiritual concerns. And what would those, what is my form of spirituality, if you will? Certainly I was influenced by my Christian faith, growing up in an African Methodist church, but also I Ching and Egyptian cosmology. And I don't think that we have to draw these lines. It's interesting that in 2025, the issues that we raised in Freedom Now Suite are as relevant as ever. So there is a song of mine that has become quite popular. I'm going to not sing the whole thing, but I will just, it'll give you a little bit more of a glimpse of how I view life, how I view love. That, there's a young woman who recently did a show, I want to say at the Lincoln Center, called The Tao of Abbey Lincoln. Tao, just, a word for philosophy. And I have over 60, probably closer to 80 published songs. Songs that I've written. And I also have a book of poems. I wrote poetry all the time. I also painted. I have my my paintings as well. But I think this song, I know this song captures my sense of how we live or how we should live. I think about the life I live, a figure made of clay, and think about the things I lost, the things I gave away. And when I'm in a certain mood, I search the halls and look. One night I found these magic words. Throw it away. You can throw it away. Give your love. Live your life each and every day, and keep your hand wide open and let the sun shine through, 'cause you could never lose a thing if it belongs to you. No, you could never lose a thing if it belongs to you. That's how I live my life. And there are many other songs. Bird Alone, Down Here Below, Being Me. The World is Falling Down, because it certainly is. Talking to the Sun, Learning How to Listen. I even wrote lyrics to Monk's song, Blue Monk. And I have a song that I did, Africa. Some say I wrote the lyrics to Coltrane's Africa, but there's a slight difference. But the gift of music is the magic of the world. It is a discipline that increases understanding and expresses the spirit of the human being. I thank God and my ancestors for the music. And when I got recognized by the National Endowment for the Arts, I thanked them for their encouragement as well. I thank all of those who've influenced me over the years. There's always that genealogy. You got to go back and look at the genealogy. You look at Billie Holiday and you look at Bessie Smith. You know, I listened to Ella Fitzgerald. I listened to Sarah Vaughan. You have to look at the jazz great Benny Carter, right? Of course, I've talked about Max Roach, but Thelonious Monk. Oh, I've got to tell you about Miles Davis. Ooh.
Maggie Brown.
Sonny Rollins, Eric Dolphy, Coleman Hawkins, Jackie McLean, so many of them.
Maggie Brown.
Maggie Brown. I'm going to tell 2 stories. I'm going to end. Artists are human beings. Understand that. Artists are human beings. You know, I was in Japan and I was supposed to travel with, you know, someone who was going to accompany me, but last minute she couldn't go, whatever the reasons. And I went anyway. But I had to then find musicians to work with me while I was there. And Miles Davis was there. And I asked Miles if he could lend me, you know, a drummer. And Miles not only sent over his drummer, he sent over 2, 3 other musicians as well to accompany me. And he eventually came himself. And I'm looking at Miles, and I could tell he wasn't well. And Miles was so generous, and people were always taking advantage of his generosity. And I saw him surrounded by a sea of people, but Miles was alone. This next story I'm not proud of, but it happened. I might as well tell it. The show must go on. That's what we say, right? Stumble off the stage, and my backup is singing the songs that I would have sang. And I said, no, I got to get out there and I got to finish it. They came to hear me singing. And my heart is beating out of my chest and I'm hot. And I just started ripping the clothes off of me. And I'm walking through the audience and I was carried out on a stretcher by paramedics. But I'm grateful that I got to live as long as I got to live. I lived on the face of this earth till I was almost 80 years old. I died on August 14th. I'm just thinking about these dates. So I had open heart surgery in 2007. That was the same year that Max Roach died. He died on August 16th, 2007.
Yeah.
I never quite recovered from my open heart surgery. I never really got my strength back. I still did another album, did shows when I was 78, 79. But I passed away on August 14, 2010. 2 more days and it would have been 3 years exactly to the date of Max's passing away. I just thought about that. Interesting how that works. Anyway, there are books that have been written that have little chapters in me, but there's an autobiography. No, not autobiography. There's a biography coming out about me next. Of course, Alicia Keys did a documentary for PBS featuring me and Diane Carroll and gosh, I forget, but there were like 6 of us. I think Cicely Tyson as well. There were 6 Black women that were featured in it. There's a documentary that was also done on Max and Abby. Certainly, there are a lot of my interviews that you can find on the World Wide Web, as you call it today. And what I can say about my life is I did it all. I did it all. And I have no regrets. So thank you for this time to talk with you.
No, thank you. And I believe this quote was also attributed to you. And you said, when people leave this earth, they spread their wings of miracle in a blaze of light and disappear. Abelinken will not disappear because her spirit lives on in your recordings.
Yes, and there's so many young people now who are re-recording my music, people who are going through my archives, performing my poetry, really delving into how I looked at life. Live your life.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yes. And be clear of what your purpose is. Yes, live your life with purpose. Yes, and thank you again. We have come to the end of another episode of Women in Resistance. Today it was Abelinken, Aminata Moseka, Gabi Lee, and whatever name you can find out. So that's it. Next week it will be the turn of BD Mason. And yeah, it promises to be another interesting and informative episode. Until next week, I would ask Abelinken to give us her final thoughts.
We are gods, you and me. We are gods. Live like the God you are.
Yep. That said, wake up tomorrow and move some mountains. Until next week, it is good night and God bless. That is it for this episode of Women in Resistance. Thank you for joining us in amplifying the voices of women who challenged injustice and changed the course of history. Be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. Together, remember, we honor the past, act in the present, and shape the future. Until next time, stay inspired and stay in resistance.